From the Journals of Dipper Pines, Sunday morning, July 7th, Grunkle Ford won't let me do anything. I'm worried sick. Why does Mabel run off and do stupid things? I'm so mad at her that if she walked in the door right this second, who am I kidding? If she did, I'd give her a sincere sibling hug and not ever want to let her go again. News, I need to record what little news there is. I have to concentrate. Real scattered. I didn't sleep much at all last night. I read in the journals, paced, fidgeted, and kept looking outside. Then, after midnight, my two granduncles showed up with a million questions. They'd cut their trip short and caught the first plane back to Oregon they could. So anyway, I sat in the parlor and answered them as best I could. Took over an hour. Wendy had stayed over and sat there listening, too. She won't say it, but I think she's just as afraid as I am. They took their overnight cases, the ones they'd had on their plane as carry-on, and went up to the attic to spend the night, my grunkles sometime around 2. I sat on the sofa next to Wendy and worried out loud about all the time we were losing. She listened, nodded, and put her arm around my shoulder and kept trying to cheer me up. We'll get through this, Dipper. Mabel can take care of herself. But like I wrote, I can tell Wendy is really scared, too. I slipped off into slurred speech, just muttering and mumbling, and I don't know when I fell asleep, but it was around 3. I know that at 4 I woke up, and I was lying on the sofa, my head resting on Wendy's knee. She'd thrown a blanket over me, and she was sprawled back with her mouth open, sound asleep and snoring a little. Her right arm lay over my chest. I reached and softly took her hand and just held it and lay there awake in the dark, waiting for the sun. Stanley and Stanford came down again at daylight, grabbed some coffee and toast, and said they were ready to go hunting. They refused to let me go with them. I was so mad. I told them, you can leave me behind, but I'll follow you. You're not gonna ditch me. Wendy tried to talk sense into me. Then Stan and Ford promised that if they didn't bring Mabel and her friends back, they'd take me with them next time if I got some rest first. Me, too, Wendy insisted. I still wanted to go, but I was so exhausted that when I stood up my head spun and I couldn't even walk straight. I think that's the tiredest I've been since I reclaimed my body from Bill that time. Wendy said, come on and rest, dude. You need it. Rest for Mabel's sake. She patted my back. I guess I was crying, but I couldn't help it. Why'd I have to do that in front of Wendy? She already thinks I'm too young for her, and there I was crying like a baby. I hate my life sometimes. Anyway, finally I gave Ford the coordinates, and he and Stan set off to explore. Wendy and Melody got me into the guest room, and I did fall asleep, fell unconscious, really, right after they left, but then after what felt like just a couple of minutes, I heard my grunkles coming in again and woke up. When they stomped through the door, looking grim, I found out that I had slept for a little over 3.5 hours. I was firing questions at them, and impatiently, Ford cut them short and told me the story. They'd found the stand of ferns, all right, a big irregular circle of them, but no mound inside the circle. Just a weedy clearing. I said desperately, but I know the coordinates were right. Dipper, I'm sure they are. It's glamour, Ford said, putting his big hand on my shoulder. By glamour I mean illusion. Fairy magic. They can baffle our eyes and other senses so we can't see their true nature, or any of their works. However, I know some possible ways around that. When we return to the forest, we'll be ready. Grunkle Stan was carrying a bundle of some kind. He looked mad, and he didn't say a word, just stomped through the house and came back without the bundle and then slumped in his old chair, staring out into space, his arms hanging down, his wrists resting on his thighs, hands dangling. What did you bring in? I asked him. In a rough, angry voice, he said, their clothes. Wendy gasped. Oh, God, no. Easy, Ford said. It's not what you think. The way we found the clothing, spread out over 20 yards or so, tells the story. The garments weren't torn off or taken off deliberately. They just fell off as the girls walked along, circling the clearing at a little distance in the woods. How could they fall off? I asked. Because the girls were physically shrinking as they traveled, Ford said. The Fae have them and want them as changelings. The Fae reproduce so rarely that sometimes they'll abduct humans and enchant them to become Fae. They're turning Mabel into a fairy? I asked. Yes, they're physically transforming the girls into their own kind. Now, changelings aren't 100% Fae, mind, they can't use Fae magic, for instance. But never mind that. The process of transformation can't be completed until the turning of the moon, that's tomorrow night at midnight, the dark of the moon before it begins to wax again as a crescent. A symbolic death of the old form and rebirth in the new, he broke off, shaking his head impatiently. Don't let me slip into lecture mode. How do we attack them? I asked. Ford said, the Fae are strongest between sundown and sunup, but during the daylight hours their abilities grow weak. We have all the hours of sunlight between now and tomorrow evening to rescue the girls. The Fae stronghold is really not very far away, a 15-minute walk through the woods, if you know the route. If the girls are not actually inside the fairy mound when the moon turns, they'll revert to their human forms. I asked, Grunkle Stan, what did you do with the clothes? I'm washin' 'em, he said without looking at me. When we get the girls back, they'll need something to wear. When? Not if. I hope Grunkle Stan is right. Let it be when. Wendy said, dude, you had Mabel's nightshirt. I saw it. Look, let me go up to the attic and pick out some daytime clothes from the girls' bags, okay? I think they'd be better. Do that, Wendy, Ford said. Thank you. Wendy? Dipper asked. Do me a favor and find Mabel's shooting star sweater, okay? It'll be folded in one of the 2 top bureau drawers. Sure thing, Dipper, she said. She brought down underwear and one outfit for each of the girls. Then Ford said, I've got an errand for you too, if you can do it quickly. He told them about the unlikely thing he wanted, and Wendy and Dipper immediately agreed to go get it. But, as Wendy pulled the old Dodge Dart out of the Mystery Shack parking lot with a spray of gravel and dust, Dipper fastened his seatbelt beside her and grumbled, I hope this isn't just to get rid of us. Chill, dude, Wendy said. Even I've heard about this weakness of fairies. It's in a bunch of old tales. We need weapons, and this is a good shot. They blasted through town, past churches where worshippers were beginning to gather for 11 o'clock services, and up the hill. McGucket and his wife were not at home, their outing with their son Tate was that day, Dipper realized. But he knew where the thing that Ford had asked for was kept. When it had been the Northwest Mansion, the McGucket house was surrounded by walls and protected by gates. The massive front gates were still there, although never closed these days. Out back a wrought iron fence 6 feet tall had surrounded the park, a 1-acre grassy spot with putting greens and a badminton court. McGucket had taken these out in favor of a helicopter landing pad, and the wrought iron fence and gate had been dismantled but not yet removed. Here we go, Wendy said, grabbing a 4-foot-wide, 5-foot-tall gate that lay near the piled sections of fence. Perfect. Ugh. It's heavy, man. The frame of the gate was a rectangle with an arched top over the topmost horizontal bar. However, the vertical bars, which had been welded to the frame, were 5-foot-tall wrought iron spears. Their tips were sharp enough to discourage climbers. Dipper took one side, Wendy the other, and they lugged it across the lawn and out to the car. It was too big to fit inside, but Wendy lashed it to the roof. Then, because the ropes had gone through the open windows and held the car doors shut, she and Dipper had to worm in through the windows. Wendy went in gracefully, feet first, as if she'd practiced it 1,000,000 times. Dipper crawled through the passenger window, fell to the floor, and had to squirm up to sit in the passenger seat. Buckle up, man, Wendy said. We're losing time. By then it was getting close to noon. Though the days were getting shorter, they still had time. The sun wouldn't set until about 9 p.m., though Gravity Falls Valley would lose the sunlight earlier and lie in dusk by that time. When they arrived at the shack, Seuss met them and helped take the gate off the car. "I know what to do, dudes," he said, firing up his acetylene-cutting torch. "You guys go get ready." They found Grunkle Stan stuffing the girls' clothes in a backpack. Wendy shook her head and took over, folding them neatly and packing them away. Ford was down in his workshop. He still kept keys to the shack and had free access to his old underground haunts, the lab and the workshop, and when he came up, he carried one of those conical glass Erlenmeyer flasks full of a rosy pink liquid. "Did you find it?" he asked Wendy. "No sweat, Ford," Wendy said. "Seuss is cutting it up for us out in the yard." "Then let's go," rumbled Stan. "First we have to prepare." Ford reached in his jacket pocket and produced a box of cotton balls. "Stanley, you first. Sit in the chair. Close your eyes. This will feel a little warm because I just brewed it." He soaked a cotton ball with the pink solution and sponged it onto Stan's eyes. His twin grimaced. "Ow, it's hot. Hey, what is this stuff? It makes my eyelids tingle like bees are having a square dance on them." "It's a potion that will give us second sight for the next 12 hours. "Wendy, you next." Stan asked, "Can I open my eyes?" "Go ahead." Wendy sat in a chair and Stan applied the mixture to her eyelids as Stan blinked and looked around. "Holy cow," he said. "This stuff works. Ford, I never realized how ugly you were. I'll resent that after all this is over." "Dipper." Dipper stood while Stan pressed another soaked cotton ball against his eye sockets. The solution was cool by then, but Stan was right, it gave him the oddest tingling in his eyelids. Some of it trickled into his eyes, too, stinging a little. "You can look now," Ford told him. When Dipper opened his eyes, he said, "Nothing looks different." "It won't," Ford told him. "Not until we see a fairy, or something fairies have made. You'll tell right away, there'll be an aura, a colorful glow, around such things." "But Stan said, I was jokin', kid," Stan told him. But he didn't smile. Wendy said, "Hey, Dip, do I look the same?" "Still beautiful," Dipper said, and blushed when both Stan and Ford chuckled. "Hey, you guys, lay off him," Wendy scolded. "He's sweet." In the yard they found that Seuss had liberated 4 of the spears from the gate frame. "Used a grinder to sharpen 'em up a little, too," he told them. "Look, I'll go with you if you want." "Thanks, Seuss," Ford told him, "but this isn't a fight you can help with. You take care of Melody and the shack and be ready for us to return. If we can rescue the girls, they may have after effects that we'll have to treat." "Not if," Dipper said defiantly, picking up one of the heavy, unwieldy iron spears. "When?" Ford smiled at him. "When it is. Let's go. Dogs. Wait up." They had not yet reached the woods. Huffing from the effort, Seuss came running and jingling toward them. "Who? Glad I caught you. This is like iron, right? I mean, it's steel, but it's iron enough to rust. Think this will help?" Ford took the coil of jangling chain from Seuss. "It just might. Yeah, it's been hanging in the junk room forever. Good luck, guys." Stan reached for the chain. Ford said, "I'll carry it." "Ya nuts? Look, this is an old shirt. I don't care if it gets rusty. You wore a good jacket." Stan pulled the coiled chain over his left arm and head and let it hang over his chest like a bandolier. "This is heavy." "Light chain, but there must be 100 feet of it. Think it'll be of any use?" "Maybe. I'm thinking we might lay it out to surround the mound. Iron has the property of weakening fairy glamour. I don't know about steel. They say cold iron is best, iron that's been shaped and pounded on an anvil. Maybe it's because it's more magnetic, I don't know." Dipper impatiently took the lead until Stan called him back. "Ease up, kid. We'll get there." Wendy, her axe in her hands, murmured, "It's like weirdly quiet." They paused. She was right, no sound disturbed the silence. "Something's building up," Ford said. "Let's move out." "It's getting foggy," Wendy said after a few more steps. "A conjured fog," Ford said. "It's okay." We marked the path. Dipper saw him constantly glancing at the ground, but it took him a few minutes to spot what Ford was looking for. "Steel bearings?" he asked. "Yeah," Stan said. "My idea. I suggested blazing a trail when we were talking it over last night, but Brainiac here said that'd do no good. Because the Fae would only strike an identical blaze on every tree," Ford explained. "Old trick of theirs. But when he said they couldn't stand iron, I grabbed a bag of these things from Fiddleford's workshop storeroom. When your hobby's building cockamamie giant robots, you use a lot of bearings." The steel spheres had not been moved or disturbed, and to Dipper's eyes, the fog was lighter in the space around each one. Before a quarter of an hour had passed, they reached the stand of ferns. "This is it," he said. "Let me take a quick look." Ford parted the fronds, they grew higher than his head, and grunted. "The St. John's wort, rose, and clover potion works. I can see the mound now. It's quiet, nothing coming in or going out." Something whizzed, and Wendy yelled, "Look out!" She thrust her axe right in front of Ford's face as he jerked his head back, and something clinked off the steel axe head. Dipper saw it spin up and over, and then it fell to earth, a tiny arrow, only 2 inches long. "Don't touch it," Ford warned, ducking down. "That's an elf bolt. It would paralyze you, or worse." "Thank you, Wendy." "S okay, Dr. Pines. Just be careful, okay? That goes for all of us." "Okay," Stan said, "so those little jerks are gonna play rough if we try to approach the mound, are they? I say let's start a fire and smoke 'em out." "No," Dipper said. "Mabel's in there." Yeah, I was just letting off steam," Stan growled. "Any ideas, Ford?" "According to legend, the Fae have to accept a challenge to battle. I'll issue one, I'll meet their champion head-to-head, and we'll fight it out. If I win, they have to grant our demand." "Yeah, and what if you lose?" "We'll worry about that when it happens," Ford said. "Nuts. I'll issue the challenge. You're a thinker, not a fighter. Stanley, it isn't a question of muscular strength. You have to know how these things think, how to take advantage of their weaknesses. I'm the logical one. Let's talk this out." Stan looked down for a second, then made a plunge for the fern barrier. But Ford grabbed his arm and held him back. "Don't be an idiot. Not now. They'd shoot you down before you could say a word. We have to wait until sundown, that and sunrise are the only 2 neutral times." "But we're gonna lose Mabel." "Tomorrow night, Stan. Tomorrow night at midnight. So at sunset today I'll issue the challenge, and if I can, I'll set the time for the duel during the hours of daylight, when we'll have an advantage." The two of them argued. Wendy kept watch, staring at the stand of ferns. The fog swirled and eddied. Dipper moved away from them. He took from his backpack the enlarging and shrinking flashlight. He found the broken-off stump of a fallen tree, a pine, fittingly enough, that he thought he could locate again, wedged the light into a crevice of the stump, and switched on the shrinking ray. He stepped into it. How big were fairies? About 6 inches, he thought, remembering the one that Seuss had once mistakenly swatted. When he was that height, he jumped out of the beam. Then, with some difficulty, he stood on tiptoe and switched the light off. It would stay there until he got back. Now that he was small, he slipped into the towering jungle of ferns. He had to fight his way through, but when he emerged inside the barrier, he could see the fairy mound clearly, not just an unsightly heap of rubbish and roots, but a strangely structured thing, the tree roots forming regular arches. He even glimpsed fairy faces staring out from them, keeping watch, but for human-sized enemies, not for anyone no bigger than they were. I won't try to get in. I'll just see if I can locate an entrance. That might give us an edge later. 15 minutes, max. I'll scope it out and then return. He plucked fern fronds, weaved them together into a kind of poncho, and pulled that over his head. He took off his cap and stuck it through his belt. Okay, I'm a fairy. Or a sprite or something. One of their own kind, anyway. If they see me, I'll bow and smile. No one seemed to notice him, though. Now that he was small, the fog became more of a dismal drizzle, the droplets of water seeming much larger. He moved around the base of the fern barrier, sometimes scrambling over roots. Once he heard a strange buzzing and crouched down, staring upward. Two fairies, whether male or female he could not tell, flitted overhead, their wings droning like bees' wings, and they zipped inside the mound through an arched opening high up. Halfway around, and then Dipper saw what he was looking for, another arch, but this one a tall and narrow one that started at ground level and reached to a point halfway up the mound. That's it. That's the entrance. How to mark it, though? He fought his way back to the far side of the ferns. There he regretted being only 6 inches tall, it made for hard work. But he tore more fronds loose, arranging them on the ground to make a roughly shaped arrow pointing inward. If they could find this, they'd have an idea where the opposing forces would appear. Back through for a last look around. The mound was quiet, he couldn't even spot the faces of guards now. Dipper retraced his steps. He was almost back to the point where he'd first come through when a laugh froze him in his tracks. A very familiar laugh. He spun and yelled, "Mabel!" And for an instant, just one instant, he saw her face looking out from one of the openings. She gave him one shocked, frightened glance and then vanished inside. Clenching his teeth, knowing that on his own he could do nothing, Dipper stripped off his fern frond disguise, slipped through the ferns, and found the place where he'd left the flashlight. All he could do was report what he had seen. That boy looked familiar, Gohallan said, turning from the window. I think I know him from somewhere. Sruthin, frowning, was trying to fly. Her small wings buzzed but were too weak to lift her off. Was he cute? She asked. I don't know, Gohallan murmured. He looked strange. No wings. Was he a gnome? Mealy's asked. On one of the soft pallets on the floor as Bria still slept, she had been the most resistant to their being confined in this room of the palace, and perhaps the guards had cast a spell of some sort, because she had hardly been awake. Gnome? I think I married a gnome once, Gohallan said slowly. Sruthin laughed and stopped leaping around. All in. Don't be cray-cray. We don't marry gnomes. There was something, the boy reminded me, I don't know, Gohallan confessed. But I'll marry Aerie, won't I? That is what he says, Mealy's agreed with a broad smile. After your wings grow fully in. After the FEASSSST. Sruthin added. I'm so hungry. They haven't offered us anything since we got here. Gohallan stared out the window, but the boy had vanished into the ferns. Since we got here, she said. Where did we come from? From out there, Mealy's said. Everyone comes from out there. But why can't I remember? You will make new memories, I think, Mealy's told her. When you become Aerie's mate. Wife, Gohallan said absently, not looking around. Sruthin said, what's that? And Mealy's added, we do not know that word. Within Mabel Pines's diminished form, her heart misgave her. The others hadn't even missed Dipper. Stan was on watch. Wendy sat at the base of a tree. Her iron spear lay beside her, across her knees she had her axe, and with a whetstone and oil she was carefully and expertly sharpening the blade. The cutting edge already gleamed like silver. Ford was pacing and muttering to himself. Dipper tried twice and finally got his attention. Yes, what is it? He asked impatiently. I know where the main entrance to the mound is, Dipper said. What? How did you find out? I, peeked. What? Dipper, you didn't. You could put our whole effort at risk. Grunkle Ford, yell at me later. Right now, let me show you where the big doorway into the mound is, okay? Ford pushed his glasses up and rubbed his eyes. Okay. But I'm very disappointed in you. This way. They walked about a quarter of the way around the fern barrier until they came to the improvised arrow. Right here, Dipper said. If you go straight through the ferns, you're standing opposite the doorway. Cautiously, Ford parted the higher fronds just enough to peek through. I see it, he said, retreating. Good work. This will be where they mass. If it comes to a pitched battle, we stand a better chance here than letting them get out of the circle and attack us from all directions. Let's make a better marker, though. He took a jackknife from his pocket and carefully blazed a tree. Then from somewhere he produced a permanent marker and signed his name on the inner what his cut had revealed. What's the point of that? Dipper asked. Aw. The Fae are cunning. If they should happen to notice what I did, they could easily make similar cuts on all the trees around, so we'd never be able to find this one. However, they can't imitate a permanent marker, and I doubt they could convincingly imitate my signature. And now, just to make sure, yes, here we are. He pulled one of the steel bearings from his pocket, then used the tip of his knife blade to hollow out a small recess just below the blaze. He thumbed the bearing inside it, then tapped it with the heel of the knife haft. There. The metal will keep the Fae from meddling with this sign. You go get the others and bring them here. Grunkle Stan complained, of course, but Wendy came along readily. You look kind of mad, Dipper told him. I am, she said. I have about had it with magical creatures screwin' with my friends. Time comes, I'm gonna chop me some fairies. Stan dumped the coiled chain and grumbled, looks just like the other spot to me. They camped near the blaze on the tree. They made a sort of damp campfire that produced more smoke than heat. They waited until Ford's phone told him it was sundown. Then he stood, faced the mound, invisible behind the shielding ferns, and bellowed, Ruler of the Fae. Hear me. You have taken our kin and our friends. We reclaim them for humanity. If you will return them, we depart in peace and leave you to your own lives. If you refuse, I challenge the champion of your naming. We will fight to the death to reclaim our own. As soon as his voice stopped, a wind sprang up. The mists coiled away and vanished. Above the trees Dipper could glimpse the dusky sky, one faint star already showing. Something rose from behind the ferns, hovering in the air. That's weird. She's as big as Ford, and she's dressed in fire. But, Dipper blinked. But she was also a reddish-pink thing only 6 inches tall, hanging in the air with jerky little hummingbird movements. This tiny creature lay somehow at the heart of the big one, which seemed almost transparent, and the big one carried a blazing sword. She spoke with a furious voice that shook the air, Mortals. Leave us. What we have, we own because they called us. You cannot retake what is no longer yours. You stole them away and gave them no free choice, Ford yelled back. I demand the right of single combat. You have no power to demand that. I say I do, and I conjure you to consent. She laughed, a cruel sound. By what puny power do you think you conjure me, the Queen of the Fae? By your true name. Ford thundered. I call you by your true name, Lennon Frenheinsmar. The illusion of size collapsed, and the Fae, revealed in her true size and form, pulsed with fiery flashes of heat and light. She screeched, rose, and plunged back behind the ferns with a buzz of wings. Did it work? Dipper asked, swallowing hard. We wait and see, Ford whispered. He held his iron spear before him. Be ready for anything. There came a fanfare of trumpets, seemingly far away, but really only small instruments just beyond the fern, and then another diminutive flying form appeared. I accept the challenge, this creature said. It was a blue fairy, but as it lowered itself to the earth it grew into a tall man shape, strangely thin and elongated, wearing scanty clothes, if they were clothes, of skins lashed together with thongs of leather. He looked like a strangely shaped sharp-featured young man of 30, fine-boned and grim of face. His bare feet, their toes unnaturally long, touched the ground and his wings folded. I am a Reachdale, and I name myself champion of the Lady Gohallen. One of you is willing to fight me to the death to claim her and her servant girls from the Fae? Yes, Ford said. You understand you must kill me to win them, and that if I defeat you, you die, you all die? The Fae will allow no human to escape from this place. We understand, Ford told him. And if you die and the Fae don't return our friends, then they all perish. If you could only kill them, the Fae man said with a sneer. We have the means, Ford said, his voice so serious that his opponent actually took a hesitant step backward. We understand the terms. Reachdale took a deep breath. Then prepare yourselves, humans. In his thin, long-fingered hand, he had not drawn it from a scabbard, but there it was, appeared a wickedly curved blade, sinuous like a snake and blazing with a coal blue flame. Ford stepped forward, raising his spear, but Reachdale shook his head and gave him a sharp-toothed grin. You threw the challenge, but by our law I choose my opponent. His grin became fiercer and he pointed. You. I fight you until one of us dies. No way. Wendy said, raising her axe. Dude, I'll fight you. He's just a kid. Stan roared. I'll do it, Dipper said. I'll fight him. Ford stepped between them, his spear raised across his chest. No. I forbid this. I issued the challenge. You must face me. Reachdale glared at him, his eyes blazing an unearthly blue. The choice is made, the deed is done. Step aside, man, or forfeit the girls. He grinned. Lennon the Queen means to send one of them to hell next season. The Dark One demands a tithe of blood once every 7 years, and the Queen pays with human blood. Now, which one shall it be, do you think? Stand there, and perhaps when the deed is done one of the Fae shall bring you the answer. I got this, Grunkle Ford, Dipper said. Let him pass. Reluctantly, Ford stepped aside. Dipper! Get your guard up. The Fae grinned. I am Reachdale the dreadful foe. I bring your death. Yeah, well, I'm Dipper Pines. Bring it on. The Fae's glowing sword arced, a blue semicircle cut out of the twilight, not in attack but in intimidating display. Dipper whipped up his spear, and the next instant it clanged, against the one that Grunkle Stan had hurled at Reachdale, sending it spinning into the twilight. Ya knucklehead! Stan bellowed. That could-a taken him out. No help, Dipper said, stepping backward as Reachdale took slow steps toward him. No cheating. Wendy, that goes for you, too. The blazing blue sword arced, and Dipper got the spear up just in time, but held it crossways between his hands and caught the Fae blade as it rang down. It struck with surprisingly little force, but the iron glowed a smoking red-hot scent of sparks and made an angry hiss. After a heartbeat, Reachdale jerked back as if he'd received an electrical shock. Come on, Dipper! Wendy yelled, stab him. Dipper had backed up beside an old-growth black oak, its trunk about 5 feet in diameter. As Reachdale drew back his sword, Dipper ducked behind the tree, there was a flash of light, and the Fae warrior swung, the sword hissing right where Dipper's throat had been a moment before, but the blade bit hard into the wood. Where are you? Reachdale bellowed in fury. You cannot hide from me. That will forfeit the fight. But I'm right here. Another flash, and Dipper grew from only inches tall to his full size. The size-changing flashlight hung from his neck on a thong, and before Reachdale could wrest his sword from the oak, Dipper thrust his spear between the Fae's legs and tripped him up. Reachdale fell backwards, spreading his wings, and lifted into the air, but now at 6 inches tall. No flying! Dipper taunted. The Fae settled to earth and grew back to human size as he did so. He stood unarmed, the Fae sword still vibrating, its blade caught in the tree. "Then kill me," he said. He touched his heart. "Strike here, and strike true." But Dipper raised the spear and held its point a few inches from the Fae's throat. "But you're not down there," he said. "I can see you. Your human body is a trick, a glamour. You're fluttering right here. Kill him!" Stan yelled. "None would blame me if I did," Dipper said softly. "Let them go. Let them go and you live." "You don't understand," Irreachdale said fiercely. "Strike." "No. Bring back my sister and her friends." "But I can't do that." The Queen, came an icy voice, "is here, traitor." Ford called out, "You named him your champion. You can't go back on your word." "Kill them," the Queen said carelessly. Dipper heard the whir of wings then, hundreds of them, and from the space above the trees Fae warriors dropped down, arrows knocked in their bows, drawing aim on the humans. He dropped his spear and reached into his vest. "And Irreachdale, too," the Queen screamed. Then she noticed Dipper. "What are you doing?" Dipper squeezed the trigger. The alien magnet gun, for once, pulsed and registered a full charge, and then an expanding wave of magnetism burst from it, enveloping first Lennon, then the descending Fae army. They tumbled from the sky, wings locked, unable to keep themselves aloft. Dipper pushed past Irreachdale, who had turned to retrieve his sword from the oak. It was getting quite dark now, but he stumbled over what he needed, grabbed it up, and turned again. Lennon was standing and trying to grow. Her body, its magic disrupted by the magnetism, would not fully obey her. Now she was a tiny torso and chest on legs nearly adult size, now she was doll-sized but weighed down by one huge arm, now she was in between. Dipper threw a loop around her and caught her by the waist. She screamed, a high, inhuman sound, and thrashed like a shark caught on hook and line too small for it. Suddenly her body was a mass of hot flame. But to Dipper it felt only warm. He squinted his eyes. The desperate Fae Queen was strong. She jerked him off his feet, then swung him around, as she transformed into something hideously like a rabid wolf. Dipper threw another loop of chain over her head and tightened it. Wendy was at his side now, her axe raised. "No, grab the chain!" Dipper yelled. "Wrap her in it!" Her hands helped. Loop after loop, and the fluid shape they contained was no longer even vaguely human, nor was it Fae, but something straight out of a bad dream, a shape that perhaps Bill Cipher woke up shrieking about after jerking out of one of his worst nightmares. Sounds poured from the writhing thing, but in no language. Ford said over the din Irreachdale. "We have your queen hostage. A life for lives, return your captives, and we will free her." Irreachdale now held his sword, freed from the oak at last. He walked to them and stared at the heaving, shifting thing wrapped in yards of chain. "That is not my decision to make," he said. A new voice, a younger one, rang out, "No. It is mine." They stood back. From the dark sky a winged form, shining and silvery, floated down. "Fae host, hear me," she called, for it was a female, beautiful in the inhuman way of the Fae. "Behold, I claim the rule of Lennon's realm. I am Isbria, banished to the human realm, now returned to reclaim what is mine." Throughout the woods, the tumbled and scattered forms of the fallen fairies now rose, flying unsteadily, not glowing brightly as she did, but flickering a dark orange as they traced jerky courses in the night. They did not attack, but hung all around, a hovering cloud of fiery sparks. Wendy said, "Dudes, I know that voice. That's Mabel's new friend from town, Amy." "I never was Amy," the fairy said. "I hid with the family while Lennon searched for me. She wished to kill me, for she knew well that I was to become queen after her. If she could have taken me in my right form, she would have killed me, for I was to be the tithe to hell this year." "Wait, what?" Dipper asked. "Where's Mabel?" "My servants are bringing her and her two friends from our mound." In the morning, mortals will have lost all memory of the girl they called Amy, and your sister and the two others will recall this night only as a dream. When Amy's human parents return, there will be no sign that such a girl ever lived, because she didn't. I assumed this disguise only last year, and created a glamour in the minds of all who knew the Lawrences that they really had a daughter. But come the morning, there will be no memento of her on earth, for all their memories of her are false, and they shall be cleared away. 5 brighter shapes came flying over the ferns. Dipper recognized one right away. Mabel! That fairy, her colors pink and orange, dipped, flying unsteadily on wings not fully formed. Boy? I know you. Give them back their right shapes. Stan said. Then unwrap the former queen, Ispria said. The girls will be restored after what must be done has been done. Are you going to kill her? Dipper asked. Let her face the old queen, Ireachdale said softly. That's how it must be. Else your sister will never return, Ispria said. Tomorrow's moon will seal her fate. Do it, Dipper, Ford said. The seething mass of alien flesh within the circles of chain tried to bite him, but he found the creature weighed very little. He pulled coil after coil of chain off it, and at last it lay and heaved on the ground, still trying to regain its form, but managing only a horrible, creeping, lurching imitation of it. Lennon! Ispria shouted, when had she become human-sized, you have lost your claim to your throne and your life. I overturn your rule and all your spells are now broken. With a hiss, the misshapen form became a striking serpent, but as it leapt, Ispria yelled, Ligi sin. The snake, caught in mid-strike, vanished. An eruption of white light blinded Dipper. He fell back from an outrush of heat that felt as if it were raising blisters on his face. His ears rang as he got unsteadily to his hands and knees. A hand reached down and pulled him up by the arm. Thanks, Dipper gasped. He turned on his flashlight. Who are you? The old man who had pulled him up was nearly a living skeleton. He resembled nothing as much as one of the zombies Dipper had conjured to impress 2 federal agents, and rags of skin clothing clung to his body. I was Ireachdale, the figure croaked. But before that I was Abraham Hales, a woodsman. Now I am human again, and my years fall on me. Someone moaned. Ireachdale took a step toward the sound, and his leg shattered into fragments and dust. He plunged toward the ground, dissolving, leaving only a pale cloud hanging in the air. Dipper, the voice sounded frightened and lost. Mabel! Dipper yelled. Where are you? Right here, Ag! Why am I naked in the woods? Yell again, Mabes, Wendy called. I'll bring some clothes for you. Here's the backpack. Grunkle Stan yelled. Leave it to Ford to light a flashlight. But he shone it upwards, not directly on the girls. Still, in the dim backglow Dipper glimpsed them, Mabel, Candy, and Grenda, sitting up in just enough fern cover to partly conceal them. Then Wendy cut off his view, lugging a backpack. Okay, Mabes, here's your sweater, underthings, skirt. Stan, didn't you think to bring shoes? Grenda, these must be yours, turn your backs, guys. Give them a little privacy. In a few minutes they were as dressed as they were going to get. Dipper had pointed his own flashlight toward the ground. Where Ireachdale had last stood there was a pile of dust and a few fragments of what could have been bone. Grunkle Ford, he called, could I borrow your knife, please? What for? You'll see. On the trunk of the oak that had nipped Ireachdale's sword, slowly and inexpertly Dipper carved the words Abraham Hales, July 7, 2013. Rip. Grunkle Ford carried Candy, Stan carried Mabel, and Grenda said she preferred to walk barefoot because the briars felt good. Back in the shack the girls got cleaned up, had their scratches bandaged, and got fed. They never gave us one bite to eat, complained Candy, and then went to bed, exhausted. The others sat in the parlor and told Melody and Seuss the whole story. Man, Seuss said, I know these woods have got, like, bizarre stuff in them, but fairies? Though I did once kill a funny-looking bug. Are we safe from them now? Melody asked. I think so, Ford told her. The new queen isn't vindictive. And they've given their tithe to the devil. What is that? Stan asked. Surprisingly, Susa's abuelita spoke up. The old people say the fairies began when some of the angels of the Lord took no sides in the devil's rebellion. The bad angels, they revolted, the good angels, they stood by the side of the Lord and fought for him, but a third of the angels took no side, and in the end they were cast out of heaven. They had no place. They could not return to heaven. They could not live in the bad place with the devils. So the Diablo, he says he will not bother them if they stay on earth, but once every 7 years they must make a sacrifice to him. But Amy never really existed? Dipper asked. Melody looked blank. Amy? Who's that? Amy Lawrence? Her mom and dad own the pharmacy? Seuss looked worried. Dude, are you okay? The Lawrences don't have any children. Dipper exchanged a look with Wendy, Ford, and Stan. It was clear they all remembered, but from what the girls had said on their way home, it was clear they did not. The Stans and Wendy got ready to go, but for a moment they all stood in the parking lot. Am I wrong? Dipper asked. Did we just get caught up in a political coup in Fairyland? Something like that, Ford said. My hunch is that Espria had to flee because Lennon's reign was getting shaky, and Lennon knew that Espria would be the next queen. I think Espria recruited Hales, or a Reachdale, as the Fae knew him, to help her. In return she'd grant his wish. Which was what? Stan asked. To die, Ford said. Something inside him knew he was human, and yearned for his final fate, after all these long and empty years. So, they made me write the fairy calling spell in my journal? Dipper asked. They made Mabel and her friends take over the attic? I don't think so, Ford told him. They took advantage of what happened. Mabel told me a little of what went on. They didn't even perform the rite properly. It shouldn't have worked. But Espria had sensed that someone who knew fairy lore was in the shack, so she mentally nudged Mabel and the others to stage the summoning. Espria herself probably mentally summoned a Reachdale. That let her get back into the Fae Palace without Lennon's realizing it. It's a good thing that the fairies didn't give the girls Fae food, by the way, that would have made it much harder for them to be returned to us. So were we supposed to, kill a Reachdale? Wendy asked. If we did, we would have won the contest, and Lennon would have to surrender the hostages, something she definitely would have refused to do, violating one of the most important laws of the Fae. I don't think your Reachdale would have killed any of us, Ford said slowly. I think the whole goal of this plot was to turn the Fae against Lennon when they realized she was breaking their traditions and rules. So the old queen passed, and the new one will be crowned tomorrow night. The death of the old moon is the birth of the new, and life goes on. Yeah, but the little flying cockroaches still ought to be exterminated, Stan growled. No, Dipper disagreed. No, they're really not our enemies. Not our friends, either. The scariest thing about them is that they just don't care about humans one way or the other. I'd rather they hated us than just have this cold indifference, but they are what they are. Wendy yawned. Well, I got a report for work tomorrow, so I'm gonna be on my way. Dipper, man, you did good. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Dipper said. He stayed in the parking lot until Stan's car and Wendy's had rumbled down the gravel drive to the highway. What do you know? She's proud of me. But I was so confused about everything. I didn't really know what I was doing. Feeling a little like a fraud, he stood alone in the dark for a few moments listening to night sounds, crickets and cicadas, the nearly inaudible twitter of bats, the insistent hoo of an owl, and away off somewhere a coyote or wild dog forlornly howling. He checked his phone, 11:55. What was it that the Duke had said in the Shakespeare play his and Mabel's class had gone on a field trip to see? The iron tongue of midnight hath told 12. 'Tis almost fairy time. Almost, he said, and shivered a little. Then he went inside to bed.